Hello, Freedom Family. This is Pastor Mark, and I am so glad that you have come back to our Freedom Channel _ Freedom for Life _ Hey, last week we had a message from God about Gideon, and the message was this, really in a nutshell. It was, don't let your resume be confused with your identity. We talked a little bit about Gideon, but I felt like there was more, that there was something else that God had that he wanted to share with you. It's a word from God for you today, so please be ready, because I believe that he's got a word that's going to change your life forever. But to go forward, I think what we need to do is we need to go back and remember where we were at in the story of Gideon. Remember that there was an angel of the Lord, it said, and the angel of the Lord called him a mighty man of valor. And we understood in that Gideon, maybe like us sometimes, was confusing his resume with his identity, the things that had happened, the life that he lived, the family that he was in, versus who God had really called and created him to be. And so Gideon had questions for the angel of the Lord, which the angel promptly didn't answer. Have you ever been there? And in that place, the angel said this: you are going to save all of Israel. There's an assignment on your life greater than where you're at, and maybe greater than you understand. And he went on to say as well, and I will be with you. A guarantee from God, and I absolutely love that. The last thing he did before he left was he gave him peace. He said this, peace be with you. And it was such a profound moment, that encounter with God and the angel of God, that Gideon did this. He named the place Yahweh Shalom. The Lord is peace, or God is peace. And so that's where the story ended last week. And those were the messages that God desired to implant on our heart. But this week there's something different, and it's so interesting to me. I just need to walk you into it. Judges 6 verse 25 says this: now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal, which was an idol, a demonic influence over their people. Take down the altar of Baal that was at your father's house, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it. Isn't it interesting that God equips us for the thing we need for the next step in our life? And the last thing that he said to him, the last thing he gave him, was this peace, this perfect peace from God. And the very next thing, he said the same night, he told Gideon this: tear down those altars that are at your father's house. The second interesting thing is this. You remember, if you remember what we had talked about previously, these Midianites, these people that were coming against the Israelites, the people of God. It happened because the Israelites turned away from God, ignored the things that he said, and decided to grab a hold of these gods, little g, that were around them. The fascinating thing to me that maybe you didn't see, but I need you to see right now, is this. Those gods, the idols, the altars, the places where they worshipped were at Gideon's house. This mighty man of valor, the one that was going to save Israel, his family were the caretakers of these idols that were tearing down his people. Which leads me to the truth of God for you. It's this: what insecurity are we dealing with that leads to inferiority, which leads to compromise? If you remember about Gideon, what he knew about his family and his tribe, which was called Manasseh, actually the half tribe of Israel, was this: that they were the weakest tribe. Out of all 12 tribes, right? Out of all my brothers and sisters, out of all the people, our tribe, our group, our family, we're the weakest of all of them. And you remember what he said on top of that: and by the way, out of my family, I'm the least. I'm the least effective, I'm the least competent, I'm the least likely to succeed. Anybody ever been there? Can you give me an amen? It was in that family that the altars and the idols resided. Isn't it interesting when we feel like we don't know who we are, or we have an insecurity about our place in life, we all of a sudden make compromises that affect every person around us. So it was interesting that the struggle of Gideon's people, for better or for worse, started in his own home. I say that because some of us are in that same place. Some of us are in that place where my biggest issue isn't my neighbor, my friend, my boss. My biggest issue is residing in my own home. And sometimes it's not my issue. It's the issue that got handed down from my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. Did you ever notice that when people struggle with alcoholism, with drug abuse or things like that, you can see it throughout generations? Did you ever notice that in many families you'll see a generation of divorce or issues within the household? Sometimes our parents and our families, they hand off to us this amazing baton of a calling, of a destiny, of a stability, of a foundation that we live with. But sometimes they hand off things that it would be better left alone. The things that we are receiving that are actually stopping us from everything that God called us to be. Remember the question we had last week? Whose freedom is your assignment? Sometimes their freedom is dictated by yours. God never invites us to take people down a road that we haven't been. And in this case, he's asking them to tear down the idols of that nation. In tearing down the idols, he was able to save the nation. Sometimes the biggest hindrance to you and I and the calling that's on our life and the things that God wants to launch us into, and he has things he wants to launch you into. Sometimes the biggest issue is us being able to deal with the us issue, the me issue that's standing in the way. It's not a calling and a belief in my future, it's a destroying of the things that are standing in my way right now. Judges 6:26 says this, and this was God talking to him. And build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood image which you shall cut down. I just need to tell you this truth about freedom. Freedom takes work. Freedom takes you actually doing something and dealing with something and moving forward in something that may not feel comfortable. It takes work, you being willing to do things that are out of your ease. Here's the challenge about God in my life, maybe in yours as well. He never changes me when I'm comfortable. He never grows me when I'm just doing the same old thing I've always done. He never moves me into where I'm called to be without me doing something too. He's always asking me to give something so I can receive. Maybe it's the same in your life. Freedom takes work. I guarantee you, from the bottom of my heart, you know I tell you the truth when I tell you this. It's worth it. But it's not going to happen because I sit on the couch or I ignore the things that are a mess around me. It happens because I tear down the altars, I create the fire, I do the thing that God called me to do. Verse 27, Judges 6:27 says this. So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. There's this message. It's a book, actually, and I love book titles because sometimes in the title of a book, you can live a life message. And there's this book by this young lady, profound title, it's this, Do It Scared. She talks about fear and the fears in our life, and she says this, hey, even if you're scared, just do it scared. And isn't it interesting with Gideon? He feared his father and his father's household. I mean, we've been there, right? Sometimes when we've feared our parents and the repercussions from the things we've done. I know if you've been a teenager, you've been there like me. Interesting, though, he also feared the people of the city. What we talked about before, I just need you to realize now. Everybody in the city was following after demonic powers because of what was happening in Gideon's household. And so he feared the repercussions of those people in the city. So he, being a man of God, did this. He did it at night when nobody was around. But here's the truth of God for you in this. Fear isn't a disqualifier unless we allow it to be our decision maker. Fear is not a disqualifier for you unless we allow it to be our decision maker. Sometimes we get this perverted concept, and I believe it's Satan lying to us and saying this, hey, if you're afraid, then you're not qualified to do it. If you're afraid, then you certainly aren't the one that God's chosen. You have to be fearless, a lie, in order to do the things of God. Gideon, I love about him this one thing, even if he was fearful, he did it. So he tore down the idols, he killed the bulls, he slaughtered them, he sacrificed to the Lord on them. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting, your struggle and your issue, your challenge and your freedom journey? That's the foundation that God is going to use to enact his ministry in your life. The thing that you fear the most, the thing that you struggle with the most, is actually going to be your testimony that builds a ministry of God. What the enemy meant for evil, God means for good. He'll take the things that have been trying to destroy you and use them to launch you into places where other people's lives are saved just because you walked into it. Man, that's a word from God. I hope you wrote it down. I'll give you a second to do that. I'm just kidding. I'm going to move on. But man, remember that phrase. So he did what he was called to do by the Lord. And then it says this. The men of the city came to Joash, his dad, and said this. Hey, bring out your son that he may die. Bring out your son that he may die. Because he had torn down their idols, and they believed that these little g gods were actually going to have a positive impact on their life. Hey man, here's a question for you. How's that working so far? Isn't it interesting how they relied on these idols and these demonic influences, and yet they still got all their stuff stolen by the Midianites and the Amorites? Sometimes we're holding on to stuff that, man, if I could just, this is the thing that's going to do it. My horoscope is going to tell me what my day is. The tarot card reading is going to tell me what my future is. We hold on to things that are destroying us, but they don't do it all at once, so that we think that they might eventually help us. So they said, hey, bring out your son, that he may die. Joash's response, he was a good dad. He said this, would you plead for Baal? Which means, would you plead for that demon? Are you his counselor? He goes on to say, let Baal contend with my son if he has an issue with it. And in that phrase, Gideon got a different name. From that point forward, he was known as Jerub-Baal, which means Baal contends with. Man, may you be a person that is contending with the things that are standing in the way of God. But here's a word for you in truth. Your identity has a name attached to it. And your identity is in the name you get when you're victorious over the things that you're dealing with. You remember there was a guy named Saul whose name changed to Paul. There was a guy named Simon whose name was changed to Peter. There was a guy named Abram whose name was changed to Abraham. Your identity has a name on it. Your victory has a name on it, just like Gideon's did. And it goes on, and I'll finish with this, Judges 6:34. It says this, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. After he was called a mighty man of valor, after he was given the assignment on his life, after that same night he destroyed the altars for the idols and he sacrificed to his God. After morning came, and the men of the city came to Joash and asked for his life, and Joash said, hey, let the demon, let that idol deal with him if he needs to. After all of that, the Spirit of the Lord came on Gideon. And I'll give you this truth for your life. None of it happened unless Gideon believed his identity, obeyed his God, and didn't allow his fear to dictate whether he followed God's instructions or not. The Spirit of the Lord would not have come upon him, I believe, if he didn't do what he was called to do. Which is interesting because we'll finish up this story next week to let you know what's coming. The Midianites and the Amorites, right after this encounter with Joash and the people of the city, they rose up to come and attack the men and women of God. God had a provision for Israel knowing that they were coming, but it took a man of God to believe who he was, to obey his God and walk in his calling, even when he was scared. And because of that, a people were saved. Here's my question for you right now. Where are you not hearing him? Where am I not hearing him? Where are the places where we hear God, but we don't obey? Here's my next question. What idol haven't you torn down yet? For all of us, maybe there's some things where I need to get rid of this thing that's in front of me to receive the thing that God has for me. Sometimes it's looking back on this is just the way we did it. This is just who we are. And start to figure out, no, that's an idol. Last question for you. What instruction have you been given that is too scary for you to obey? Where have you let fear stop you from everything God has for you? I love this about the story of Gideon and the man of Gideon himself. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't bulletproof. He wasn't a superhero. He was a young man who was just living his life believing that that was all there is, until the angel of the Lord came and told him he was something different and there was more that he had. And he actually walked in it even though he was scared. Yeah, I'm Pastor Mark. I am glad you're on our channel. _freedom for life _ Man, if this content blesses you, would you please leave a comment down below? And those questions, would you let me know where you're at? What God's doing in your life, and maybe what you're struggling with, or maybe that word that was too big for you to be able to actually walk in without being scared. Fear can't stop you. I'd love for you to share that in a comment down below. Subscribe, because we're going to have more material, and I believe God's got more words that he wants to share with you. And would you click that bell? This isn't even the official launch of our site. This isn't even the official launch of our channel. Freedom is here, but freedom is coming in a way that you wouldn't even imagine. We have an official launch coming, and I don't want you to miss out on any of the content, because there's things that God wants to do in your life to establish you, grow you, heal you, set you free, and make you whole so that you can live the life that he's called you to. This freedom journey looks like this, and this alone. It's me living out the life that God had called and created for me, and dealing with everything that's standing in between. That's what the freedom journey looks like, and we want to be a part of it with your life. For now, this is Pastor Mark. I hope you have a great week. Peace, and we'll talk to you soon.